In a prison in Colorado in 1939, there was one inmate who was known for being different from everyone else, while the other prisoners lived in fear as they waited for their final days. This man spent his time playing with a toy train, smiling at the guards, and greeting everyone he met as if nothing terrible was about to happen. His name was Joe Arridy. The prison guards even gave him a nickname, the happiest prisoner on death row. It sounds like a strange title until you learn the one heartbreaking truth that makes his story so deeply tragic. Joe never truly understood that he was approaching the end of his life. Years later, more and more people began questioning whether that man should have been there in the first place. Some believe that Joe Arridy was not only the victim of a deeply flawed legal process, but also the victim of a system that failed to protect someone with intellectual disabilities. Honestly, out of all the cases I have ever studied, Joe Arridy's story is one that has stayed with me the most. The more I read through the documents and the facts behind this case, the harder it became not to feel just how tragic Joe's story truly was. Hello everyone, welcome back to Jejak Kala. Today, we'll be exploring one of the saddest cases in the history of the American justice system. A case that, even decades later, is still remembered as a symbol of how a confession, a legal process, and a court decision can change someone's life forever. So, without further ado, let's begin. Joe Arridy was born in 1915 in Pueblo, Colorado, United States. From an early age, his family noticed that Joe developed differently compared to other children his age. He had an intellectual disability that made it difficult for him to understand many things that seemed simple to others. Despite that, Joe grew into a kind-hearted person who was friendly, always smiling, and almost never showed aggression toward anyone. As he grew older, Joe's condition remained largely the same. He struggled to follow complicated conversations, easily trusted other people, and often failed to fully understand the situations happening around him. Several doctors who later examined him estimated that Joe's mental ability was comparable to that of a child around 6 years old, meaning he needed guidance in many aspects of his daily life. To the people who knew him, Joe was not someone to be feared. Instead, he was remembered as a gentle, innocent, and caring man who found happiness in the simplest things. His smile was almost always present, even when meeting someone for the first time. That personality was what made many people remember Joe Arridy, even decades after his death. At that time, society's understanding of people with intellectual disabilities was still extremely limited. Many individuals with conditions like Joe's did not receive proper support and were often treated differently by those around them. Joe continued living a simple life, never knowing that fate had prepared a story for him, one that would later be remembered as one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in the history of the American justice system. In mid-August 1936, the residents of Pueblo, Colorado, were shocked by a crime that quickly became the center of attention throughout the city. In a matter of days, the sense of safety that people had always felt began to turn into fear. Almost everyone wanted to know who was responsible for such a horrifying event. The victim in the case was Dorothy Drain, a 15-year-old girl. She was found in a devastating condition after becoming the victim of a brutal attack inside her own home. Her cousin Barbara Drain, who was also present at the scene, became a victim of the same attack, but managed to survive despite suffering serious injuries. News of the incident spread rapidly. Local newspapers continued reporting updates from the investigation day after day, while the community became increasingly anxious. Many families grew more cautious and worried that the person responsible might still be somewhere nearby. Pressure on law enforcement continued to grow. The public demanded that the person responsible be found and brought to justice as quickly as possible. For the police, this was no longer just an ordinary investigation. It had become a major case that was being closely watched by the entire community. Investigators immediately examined the crime scene, collected evidence, and interviewed anyone who might have known something about that night. Various clues began to be gathered one by one, but none of them truly pointed toward a confirmed suspect. Days passed without any clear answers. Police received numerous reports from the public, but most of them were only suspicions and information that could not be verified. Meanwhile, pressure from the media and the victim's family continued to increase as the case remained unsolved. The investigation was eventually expanded into different areas. Police began examining several individuals they considered suspicious, hoping that one of them could provide a new lead. It was during this process that investigators' attention finally turned toward a man named Frank Aguilar. After being arrested and questioned, Frank Aguilar provided several statements to the police. From there, another name began to appear in the investigation files. That name was Joe Arridy. During questioning by investigators, Frank Aguilar provided various statements regarding the case. Among the many names mentioned throughout the interrogation process, there was one name that had barely appeared in the investigation before: Joe Arridy. From that moment, the attention of the police slowly began to shift toward him. At the time, Joe himself was not living in Pueblo. Sometime earlier, he had been in the state of Wyoming, living a simple and quiet life. There were no records suggesting that he was attempting to escape or hide his identity. He continued his daily routine as usual, unaware that his name was now being searched for by law enforcement in Colorado. Information regarding Joe's whereabouts was then passed on to authorities in Wyoming. Not long after that, local police managed to locate him and bring him in for questioning. To investigators, Joe was now considered someone who might know something about the murder case, even though at that time there was no physical evidence directly connecting him to the crime scene. From the very first time they met Joe, some people began noticing that his way of speaking and his behavior were different compared to most adults. He appeared to have difficulty understanding the questions being asked, often gave inconsistent answers, and seemed eager to please anyone who was speaking with him. However, during that era, society's understanding of intellectual disabilities was still extremely limited, meaning Joe's condition was not given serious attention during the questioning process. Instead of providing him with a psychologist or someone who understood his condition, Joe was questioned like any other adult suspect. Question after question continued to be asked, and inside that room, the series of events that would forever change Joe Arridy's life began to unfold. After the investigation was declared complete, Joe Arridy's case was finally brought before the court. The trial quickly attracted public attention throughout Colorado because it involved a murder case that had already shocked the community. Inside the courtroom, prosecutors attempted to convince the jury that Joe was one of the individuals responsible for the death of Dorothy Drain. The main argument presented by the prosecution was the confession given by Joe Arridy during the interrogation process. According to them, the confession was enough to prove that Joe had been involved in the crime. In addition, prosecutors also presented several witnesses and various statements that they believed supported their case. On the other side, Joe's defense team attempted to show that his mental condition should have been the main focus of the trial. They explained that Joe had an intellectual disability that made him highly vulnerable to influence and unable to fully understand complicated situations. They also questioned whether Joe's confession could truly be considered reliable, given his extremely limited ability to process information. Several experts who testified during the trial also provided evaluations regarding Joe's condition. Their examinations showed that his intellectual ability was far below that of the average adult. In fact, Some experts estimated that Joe's mental capacity was comparable to that of a young child. These findings raise serious questions about whether he was truly capable of understanding the legal process he was going through. Although various explanations regarding Joe's condition were presented before the court, the trial continued to focus heavily on the confession he had previously given to investigators. For the prosecution, that confession remained the most important piece of evidence. But for the defense team, it was exactly that confession that should have been questioned the most. After hearing all the statements and arguments from both sides, the jury finally entered deliberations to determine their decision. Joe Arridy's fate was now in their hands. The decision they were about to make would not only determine whether he was guilty or innocent, but also decide whether he would spend the rest of his life behind bars or face a much harsher punishment. Not long after, the decision was finally announced inside the courtroom. Joe Arridy was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. For some people, the verdict was seen as a form of justice for the victim. However, for others, the decision became the beginning of one of the longest and most controversial debates in the history of the American justice system. After the sentence was handed down, Joe Arridy was transferred to the death row cells at the Colorado State Penitentiary. For most prisoners, that place was associated with anxiety, regret, and fear. Every passing day brought them closer to what they believed would be the final moments of their lives. However, the prison guards quickly noticed that Joe was different from the other inmates. He did not appear to be overwhelmed by fear like most people on death row. Joe continued living his days calmly, smiling at the guards, and talking to anyone who approached him. Many people believed that he did not truly understand the meaning of the sentence that had been given to him. While in prison, Joe developed a close relationship with several guards, especially the prison warden, Roy Best. Roy Best eventually began treating him with special care after realizing that Joe had a very serious intellectual disability. Among all the belongings he had, there was one object that always brought Joe happiness. A small toy train became a companion that was almost never separated from his hands. He would often spend hours playing with it inside his cell, as if the outside world was not preparing for the final day of his life. That sight left a deep impression on many officers who witnessed it. On January 6, 1939, the day that had been set long before finally arrived. After various legal efforts and requests for clemency failed to change the court's decision, Joe Arridy was scheduled to face execution at the Colorado State Penitentiary. According to several historical records, Joe faced that day with an attitude that was very different from most prisoners awaiting execution. He remained calm and even smiled several times at the officers who had known him during his time in prison. Before being taken away from his cell, Joe was still holding his beloved toy train. Joe then handed over the toy without any fear, as if he believed he would be able to play with it again later. A short time later, Joe was taken to the execution room to face the sentence that had been handed down by the court. At just 23 years old, his life came to an end as a convicted man who would later become one of the most controversial figures in the history of the American justice system. For decades after Joe Arridy's death, his name remained part of ongoing discussions about failures within the American criminal justice system. Historians, academics, and legal experts continued examining old documents and questioning whether a man with an intellectual disability like Joe had ever truly received a fair legal process. Interest in the case continued to grow, eventually leading to an official request to restore Joe Arridy's name. Many people argued that although the sentence could no longer be undone, the state still had an opportunity to acknowledge that there were serious doubts surrounding the legal process that had once led to his conviction. On January 2011, More than 72 years after Joe Arridy was executed, Colorado Governor Bill Ritter officially granted Joe Arridy a posthumous pardon. In his statement, Ritter explained that the pardon was not meant to determine who the actual perpetrator was, but rather to recognize that there were serious doubts about the fairness of the legal process Joe had gone through. The pardon came when everything was already too late. Even so, Joe Arridy's story continues to leave behind an important lesson. His case serves as a reminder that the justice system, no matter how carefully it is designed, is still operated by human beings who are capable of making mistakes. And when those mistakes happen in cases involving someone's life, the consequences can continue far beyond the courtroom's final decision. What do you think? Was the pardon given decades later enough to provide justice for Joe Arridy? Or are there some mistakes that can never truly be corrected, no matter how much time has passed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. A special thank you to everyone who has supported this channel by buying us a cup of coffee. Special thanks to Nat Cole, Aurora, Drift Pilot, Ellie Morgan, Rex, Skyline 88, Isaac Turner, Maple, Ori Frame, Zoe Bennett, Cypher, Eddie Prick, Ember, Fuxie, From Julian, I Love Chinese Dramas, Beauty Blake, Tiny Toast,